Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jane Lubchenco. I serve as Deputy Director for Climate and Environment at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. My good colleague, Dr. Alondra Nelson, OSTP's Deputy Director for Science and Society, and I have co-organized today's annual meeting panel on rebuilding the federal scientific workforce. We'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Marcia McNutt, the NAS President, for suggesting this panel and inviting us to co-organize it. The previous session highlighted the central role that science plays in the Biden-Harris administration, and it gave you a taste of some of our exciting priorities. And from the abundance of powerful actions already taken by this administration, it should be crystal clear to each of you that science is back. In this administration, science is valued, respected, and actively used to benefit the lives of working people, as well as families around the world. Science should mean hope and opportunity. Like the lighthouse on my pin, science should guide us along the way. We seek to provide that beacon, to harness that potential, to make those opportunities and that benefit broadly available. For science to be maximally helpful now and in the future, it is imperative that we have a vibrant and diverse federal scientific workforce, a culture that enables them to be maximally creative and productive, and a commitment to openness, transparency, and evidence-based decision-making so that their science is actively shared and public and used to make policy and management decisions. We are here today to explore elements of those aspirations. We have an exciting panel lined up for you today. Our goals for this panel are three. One, highlight the importance of a strong scientific workforce in the federal government. Two, shine a spotlight on the importance of ensuring that the enabling conditions are in place for science to thrive and inform understanding, policy, and action. And three, highlight the imperative and the immediate opportunity to build back better a federal scientific workforce. We hope to convince you, NAS members, and everyone joining us today that you should be active partners in helping strengthen, diversify, and rebuild the federal scientific capacity we need for the nation we want. Following my opening remarks, I will turn the program over to Dr. Nelson, who will introduce our panel and lead a conversation. We will reserve the final 20 minutes or so of the program for questions from our audience, so prepare to engage. Let me begin by highlighting the central role that science should play in any administration. Scientists across the federal agencies play critical roles. They produce and fund basic and use-inspired discoveries that push the boundaries of knowledge in every conceivable discipline. For that knowledge to be useful and to be used, it must be shared, not only with other scientists, but with the public and decision makers. It must be trusted. And so who creates and communicates the science matters, as do the conditions under which it is created and shared. Science will be strongest when scientists are humble and open to ideas, questions, and collaboration from diverse sources. Scientists should respect and value indigenous and traditional knowledge. In many circumstances, co-creation of knowledge with diverse actors, diverse users, can enhance discovery as well as facilitate salience and trust. Moreover, diverse perspectives are more likely to create breakthroughs and yield richer and more robust information and knowledge. We need a federal scientific workforce that looks like America. We do not have that now. One goal of this administration is to create a federal scientific environment that taps into new potential, particularly from those historically underrepresented, so that science can thrive and all people can benefit. For agency and administration priorities, for agency and administration policies and practices to be most effective, they should be solidly grounded in the best possible science. In short, people benefit when science is at the table. Regardless of whether an agency is providing a hurricane forecast, reporting climate trends, or issuing guidance to minimize the spread and impacts of COVID, the public needs to have confidence that the information or policies have not been manipulated for political reasons or for personal gain. People need to be able to trust that the government is telling them the truth. So, what are some of the enabling conditions for science to thrive and for people to trust the science-based information that they receive? Here are three that are relevant to our discussions today. Enabling condition number one, policies and a robust culture of scientific integrity. The Biden-Harris administration is dedicated to ensuring that science and evidence are central to federal decision-making, and that scientific information is not manipulated, suppressed, distorted, or cherry-picked. President Biden made this goal crystal clear when on his 7th day in office, he issued a presidential memorandum entitled Restoring Trust in Government Through Scientific Integrity and Evidence-Based Policymaking. One portion of this presidential memorandum focuses on safeguarding federal science and scientists from political interference by assessing and updating agency policies. These policies will prevent improper political interference in the conduct and collection of scientific research data, prevent the suppression or distortion of scientific or technological findings, data, information, conclusions, or technical results, support scientists and researchers of all genders, races, ethnicities, and backgrounds, and advance the equitable delivery of the federal government's programs. The presidential memorandum directs OSTP to take a number of steps to strengthen scientific integrity policies across the executive branch. Dr. Nelson is leading that effort. I assist, and we look forward to sharing more information about our findings and actions in due course. We need only reflect on the so-called Sharpiegate incident to understand why it is so important for the federal government to ensure strong scientific integrity. You will recall that with the stroke of a black Sharpie marker, the forecast track of Hurricane Dorian was irresponsibly altered in September of 2019 to defend President Trump's earlier incorrect assertion that Alabama was in the path of the hurricane, when in fact it was not. NOAA's National Weather Service office in Birmingham was castigated by President Trump's political appointees for providing accurate information to the public in the middle of a crisis when accurate, life-saving information was of utmost importance. The entire scandal risked undermining public trust in government information, demoralized dedicated scientists and federal employees who are devoted to accuracy and public safety, and highlighted the importance of having in place robust, enforceable scientific integrity policies with real consequences to minimize the likelihood of violations of public trust. Robust scientific integrity policies and a culture of integrity are thus both in the public interest and are necessary to help attract, retain, and nurture a talented workforce. Enabling condition number 2, an empowered and valued workforce. The best and the brightest scientists will be attracted to positions where they can create, thrive, and contribute meaningfully to society. Because exposure to innovation substantially increases the chance for further innovation, there need to be opportunities for agency scientists to interact, share, learn from other agency scientists, as well as non-governmental scientists. Federal scientists need viable career paths with clear opportunities to advance their careers and be trusted voices in their agencies. Federal scientists must have the ability to be fully functional members of the scientific community, to publish, attend scientific meetings, and be active in professional scientific societies. And enabling condition number 3, a diverse workforce. Diverse perspectives and different ways of thinking are consistently highlighted as powerful ways to enhance the likelihood of discovery and the robustness of solutions. At present, the federal scientific workforce does not look like America. It should. Strategies to inspire, attract, retain, support, and empower a diverse workforce are urgently needed. Moreover, fostering a culture of federal scientists serving local communities may attract talented individuals, advance science, and contribute to the salience of the resulting information or solutions. New organizations, such as Science for Social Equity, can serve as a model for how federal scientists can address problems identified by their communities. Recently introduced legislation in the NSF for the Future Act would require its director to consider social and economic inequality when selecting focus areas. Many federal agencies lost significant numbers of talented scientists during the last administration. This highly unfortunate situation now creates a golden opportunity to build back better. So, what will it take to jumpstart a process that energizes great scientists to join the federal workforce? This administration values protecting the federal workforce, as a number of executive orders have already addressed, but more needs to be done. How can federal scientists benefit from these executive actions? What other actions could be taken? For example, one common deterrent is that the US government is notoriously slow at hiring through usajobs.gov. And too many academics are unfamiliar with the arcane process. How might that be addressed? What other steps might attract new, diverse, outstanding scientists into government service? What are the current impediments and how can they be overcome? How can we attract creative and dedicated folks? We look to our panel and listeners for ideas. With that in mind, it's now my great pleasure to turn over the virtual microphone to my valued colleague, Dr. Alondra Nelson, Deputy Director of Science and Society at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Alondra?
Thank you, Jane, for those really inspiring opening remarks about the important role of science and of scientists coming from many disciplines, methods, and perspectives in the Biden-Harris administration. It's been really a pleasure to work with you to bring today's speakers into discussion about the crucial work of rebuilding the federal science workforce. I join you in thanking National Academy of Sciences President, Dr. Marcia McNutt, for the invitation to participate in the 2021 annual meeting. And I also want to extend our appreciation to Jenny Munn and the stellar team who've done so much to make this virtual convening possible. So as you heard, Dr. Lubchenco laid out powerfully the need for today's conversation. As we come upon the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration, I want to underscore an issue that she raised about the enduring importance of the role of science and technology, as well as the forward momentum that was conveyed in Jane's remarks. Today's speakers will also note this forward momentum and note as well that it requires an awareness of and an attention to what Jane called enabling conditions, the conditions that will enable a thriving science and technology enterprise. And I would like to offer that these conditions include social infrastructure. That is the ability for federal scientists to have the support, broadly considered, and autonomy to do their best work that can inform the best policy and stimulate the best outcomes for the American public. I will introduce the speakers and the order they will speak, and I invite you to consult their full bios on the NAS Annual Meeting website. After their presentations, we will have a brief conversation with the speakers. During this time, you'll be invited to begin to place your questions in the Slido platform that's underneath the webcast. It is my great pleasure now to introduce this distinguished group of speakers. We are joined today by Dr. Gretchen Goldman, Research Director at the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union for Concerned Scientists. An environmental engineer, Dr. Goldman has led research efforts at the nexus of science and policy on topics ranging from federal scientific integrity to fossil energy production, climate change, and environmental justice. Dr. Goldman has testified before Congress and currently serves on the 500 Women Scientists Leadership Board and the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. Mr. Max Stier is President and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service. Max has worked previously in all three branches of the federal government. In 1982, he served on the federal personal staff of Congressman Jim Leach. Max clerked for Chief Judge James Oakes on the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit in 1992, and clerked for Justice David Souter of the United States Supreme Court in 1994. Max is an elected member of the National Academy of Public Administration. Dr. Bruce Roden is Associate Director for Science for the Office of Research and Development and Deputy Assistant Administrator at the EPA. Dr. Roden is a physician with master's degrees in environmental studies and public health. His role in the ORD immediate office of the Assistant Administrator is to advance the broad spectrum of human health and ecological research initiatives that have been conducted by the EPA. Prior to this work, he was Assistant Director for Environmental Health at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, serving for 8 years under both the Bush and Obama and Bush administrations. Dr. Marie Bernard, Deputy Director of the National Institute of Aging and Chief Officer for Science Workforce Diversity at NIH. Dr. Bernard co-leads the NIH Inclusion Governance Committee that ensures appropriate inclusion of individuals in clinical trials by sex and gender, race and ethnicity, and age. She also leads the Women of Color Committee of the Working Group of Women in Biomedical Careers. Until 2008, she was the endowed professor and chairperson of the Donald W. Reynolds Department of Geriatric Medicine at the University of Oklahoma. She is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the 2019 NIH Directors Award and the 2020 NIH Directors Award for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So welcome all and thank you. This will be a lively session full of ideas about our aspirations for the health and future of the federal science workforce. We will begin with Gretchen and Max for their insights about the federal science enterprise, and then we will segue to Bruce and Marie, scientists currently working in the federal government, who will speak to the challenges, successes, and concrete ways to strengthen the federal science. With that, we turn things over to you, Dr. Goldman, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I am really excited to talk about this with you all today as someone who has thought about the federal workforce and federal scientific integrity for a decade. And from doing that work, it is very clear to me just how valuable the federal scientific workforces, not only for the ensuring that agencies can meet their missions, but also for providing that benefit to the public. The public, of course, greatly benefits from the federal scientific workforce being robust and diverse and effective through public health and safety protections, through enhanced security, through technological advances. And we see that every day, whether or not we're aware of it. And so in light of those many benefits that you heard Dr. Lubchenco mention as well just now, I was very concerned to see levels of federal scientific workforce for science agencies drop in the last few years. This is data from a recent study that we conducted at the Union of Concerned Scientists looking at scientific staffing levels at select science agencies since 2016. And you can see that some agencies did drop significantly in both the percentage and raw number of levels of scientific staff at their agency. This graph is in percentage, but I wanted to call out that some of those agencies with drops in raw numbers were fairly substantial. When we look at the Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, we see they lost 231 scientists since 2016, and the Environmental Protection Agency lost 672 scientific staff numbers since 2016. And this is problematic in general in terms of overall capacity, but also because it means there may be losses in particular areas. So when we dive deeper into the EPA numbers, for example, we see that a disproportionate amount of that loss came from a few job series, and the vast majority of them came from the environmental engineering and environmental protection specialists job series. And this, we did check in this data to make sure that it was people that had left the agency as best we can tell, as opposed to changing job series. But this is problematic potentially in terms of expertise loss. But I also did want to call out, as Dr. Lubchenco mentioned, that this also presents an opportunity in that we can think about how do we build back up that capacity in the areas where we need that expertise. So this can be both to potentially change or modify the expertise that's needed given what we know are our current agency needs, current research areas that could use more expertise. So there's an opportunity to change gears potentially in some of these places. And it's also a potential opportunity to diversify and get early career scientists into federal agencies. We know there's in general an aging federal workforce in many places. And so this is an opportunity to bring in new talent, to diversify who's there so that we have a more inclusive scientific workforce that's reflective of the diversity of the nation. And I also wanted to look at some other things that are giving me hope in thinking about this issue and how do we better ensure that there is a climate for science to thrive across agencies. This is from a 2018 survey of federal scientists that was published in PLOS One last year that the Union of Concerned Scientists conducted with Iowa State University. And we asked respondents, which were scientists, people with scientific jobs across agencies, to ask if they agreed that their agency adhered to its scientific integrity policy. And across agencies, we found that all of the agencies we looked at, more respondents agreed than disagreed with this statement. And that was in spite of some of those losses in capacity that we saw on previous slides, and also in spite of the many examples of instances where science was sidelined or ignored or otherwise cast aside in recent years. And so just in spite of all those things, we still see that respondents on our survey at least thought that scientific integrity was being upheld. And so what this says to me is that we are on the right track. The scientific integrity infrastructure that was conceived of and originally implemented under the Obama administration did its job. It was effective in addressing the kinds of political interference that it was intended to address. And now we just need to expand upon this and think about how do we build upon that framework to address some of the newer kinds of issues that we've seen in recent years, which hadn't necessarily been envisioned in previous administrations. Dr. Lubchenco mentioned Sharpiegate as an incident, and I don't think that many of us anticipated that we would have to worry about that kind of interference in science. And so I think now that we have seen all of those recent examples in the past few years, and we have a wealth of data from this survey and other sources of information about how things have worked or not at different parts of the government and comparisons between agencies, that we can now use that to really think about how do we bolster that scientific integrity infrastructure to advance the environment for science and scientists across the government. And at the same time, we'll need to think bigger and bolder about exactly what we want to see from the federal scientific workforce. I think there's a lot of really innovative things that we can do. We can really expand how we can diversify our scientific workforce. How can we ensure that it is a better climate for everyone to be there? And I am excited to see the administration thinking bigger about that, about how do we incorporate some of those ideas. So I will stop there, and I look forward to the discussion and thinking more about ways we can improve.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. That's some incredibly powerful, data that illustrates some of the issues that we're facing, and I look forward to coming back to some of the issues you raised in the in your presentation in the conversation. Now, I'm pleased to pass things to Max Dyer.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson and Dr. Lubchenco, for including me in this conversation. This is such an important issue that doesn't receive enough attention. I lead the Partnership for Public Service. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization focused on trying to make the federal government work better, and it all begins with talent. So this is a critical issue. I'm going to try to cover 3 questions in 5 minutes. First, what's the problem? Second, why does it exist? And then third, what can you do about it? So the problem, Dr. Goldman did a very nice job of presenting a bunch of data on some of the issues that are on the table. Writ large, if you look at the federal workforce, only 6% of that workforce is under the age of 30. Only 3% is under the age of 30 in IT. And the number is slightly better in the scientific workforce, but still lags substantially what you would see in the private sector. Some agencies have been devastated, and the worst example of that is the Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which saw on average half of its workforce quitting rather than being moved quickly out of the DC area. Can't help but note that if you go back to the moon landing, Apollo 11, the average age of mission control was 28 years old. Very, very different world than I think we're thinking about. So why does this exist? And I will point to 5 big reasons for this. The first is the federal brand has been damaged, and it comes from government shutdowns, hiring freezes, negative rhetoric, political interference in science decisions, and all those things have undermined the brand, and there's been very, very little positive investment in it. Secondly, opportunities, especially for young people, are hidden. Just 4% of new hires are drawn from federal programs employing current students or recent graduates. The most basic things, student internships, are almost never used. Third, the hiring process is deeply broken. There are lots of reasons about. Dr. Lubchenco talked about time to hire. The actual assessment processes are also deeply broken. 90% of hires are done exclusively on self-reported information from the applicant. And the list goes on in terms of what's broken on the hiring process. Fourth, and very importantly, and an issue that most people don't focus on, is that we're not retaining the talent that's there. So almost 3/4 of those that are under the age of 30 who are leaving government leave within 2 years. So even when you do the right work to get people in, if you can't hold them, you haven't done yourself much good. And then finally, as a point that's been raised and that is vital, is that the diversity in STEM is a big issue, bluntly, in the broader scientific workforce, but especially in government. So what can we do about this? Rather than just admire it, I'm going to offer 10 quick suggestions that we can talk about now or later in any time that folks want. Number one, and most important, this is a leadership issue. The leaders in government have plenty on their plate, and therefore the urgent crowds out the important, and they almost never pay any attention to the critical issues of the talent pipeline coming in. Leadership ownership is fundamental, or you'll never change the situation. We have a public sector leadership model at the partnership, which I think should be the basis of both political and career leadership choices. We have a best places to work leadership effectiveness ranking. Those are things that ought to be viewed in analyzing whether leaders are doing their jobs. And bluntly, we need to reduce the number of political appointees. A big issue here is you have short-term political leaders that don't align to the long-term needs of the agencies they're running. They're not thinking about a talent pipeline that doesn't pay off for them in their short time that they're there. Number two, we need to begin with the strength of government, which is its mission. That's what's special and what really sets government apart. There are some great examples. NASA has a custom-built career website that includes video stories of the amazing things that federal employees are doing. We have our Service to America Medals program, which is unbelievable in telling great stories. We have no recognition culture in government of the great things that are going on. That needs to change. Three, we need to improve recruiting and hiring. There are a bunch of recommendations that are out there. The most clear and basic ones were set out by the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service. They're there. They could be enacted immediately and would create huge benefit. Four, we should get young people in government. And that includes paid internships, which don't happen nearly enough. Five, there are innovative talent models that I think would be really powerful to use. We can see them in a number of agencies that aren't shared across government. Six, we got to overhaul the pay and classification systems. The pay system in government was designed in 1949 when we had a clerical workforce, not a professional workforce, and that makes a big difference. Seven, we have to invest in the HR workforce itself, and there ought to be a STEM human capital strategy across government. It's a vertically organized government. We should be thinking horizontally on issues like science. Eight, we need to create a culture that embraces technology, innovation, and collaboration. Example of this is a lot of talent coming in finds different technology on their Monday than they have in their Sunday, and that chases them away. Nine, we need to make DEI part of the workforce strategy. If you look in the federal government, I mentioned this earlier, you see that 36% of the senior executive service, the top leaders in government, are women, 23% are people of color, and those numbers are even worse when you look at STEM positions. Just 26% are female and 18% are people of color. And then lastly, we need more of this. We need the private sector, nonprofit, philanthropy, universities, business, all caring about not just the policies they want, but the actual capability of our government. There you go.
Thank you so much, Max. There's a lot there. It's a really provocative, both observations and suggestions, and I look forward to taking those up in our conversation. So we'll turn now to comments from two colleagues who are currently working in the federal government. We'll hear first from Dr. Bruce Roden. Bruce, over to you.
Fighting with the mute button. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Bruce Roden, the Associate Director for Science in EPA's Office of Research and Development. I'm currently serving in the role of Deputy for Science in OID as we await a confirmation of a political appointee to head OID. Given today's topic of rebuilding the federal scientific workforce, I would start with big kudos to two organizations that represent the heart of science in the United States, the National Academies and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So to EPA, many think of EPA only as a regulatory agency, but the agency also proudly houses the world's leading environmental research organization, the Office of Research and Development. So here we are, 12 labs, 1,500 employees, and an approximate $520 million operating budget. I should also emphasize that thousands more scientists work in EPA's regulatory programs and EPA's 10 regional offices. PhDs, masters, bachelors, scientists all. Scientists like data, so let's show some. These are the employee trends for EPA's Office of Research and Development since 2010. While this decline has continued, many environmental problems remain, and many new and complex environmental challenges have emerged. So slide 4 is resource trends for EPA research over the last 10 years. So full disclosure, the y-axis is set at 200, not at 0. So in the science community, it must be accurate to the axes. The blue line is the actual budget for research and development. The red line here represents the inflation-adjusted budget. To be clear, inflation has real effects, and it resulting in salary and laboratory expense increases that directly reduce cash resources against a congressionally set ceiling. The big take home is the 42% budget plummet in the president's budget for EPA research. It was ultimately not enacted by Congress, but you can see at the end a 42% decline. This roller coaster occurred 4 times over all 4 years of the last administration. Now, normally we can expect some political turmoil in Washington. It is Washington. But the extent of the attack on research was new. Normally, the generation of new knowledge is nonpartisan. Some would say it's only politics, but it has consequences. It sends adverse messaging and uncertainty to both staff and potential recruits, has real impacts where we must hold back expenditures and cease hiring just in case. Believe me, the worry was real. I recall feeling physically nauseous when I opened the email in early 2017 and did the math on the extent of the PresBud proposed cuts to EPA research. I was not alone in feeling this impact. So now I'm going to propose some quantitative and qualitative recommendations for how to rebuild the federal scientific workforce. Quantitative. The first one's sort of fairly obvious. Reverse the declines. Depoliticize and make support for research bipartisan. 2, provide predictability to budget and personnel numbers. As a predominantly intramural program, our scientists have long and productive careers at EPA, and we love our postdocs. Many ORD scientists are now retirement eligible, and we need to create a steady cycle of hiring and advancement of new, young talent. And the third one is flexibility in hiring. Some cutting-edge scientific disciplines command high salaries in the private sector. Now, EPA is fortunate to be able to compete for hires using the same Title 42 authority as Health and Human Services. But EPA's authority is not yet permanent and only for a limited number of Title 42 hires. We have used this Title 42 authority to augment our research staff with some pretty amazing talent. Now, qualitative rebuilding. Let me start by emphasizing that science never left EPA. Issues have been with the use by some of alternative facts and supposed uncertainty to justify policy decisions. I guess I think back to Al Gore's 2006, An Inconvenient Truth. I'll say it again, an inconvenient truth, where facts are inconveniently getting in the way of what someone wants to do. So next proposal, research to provide solutions. A major reason researchers and scientists come to EPA is because federal scientists can directly improve people's lives and the environment. ORD is working to further this applied research by fostering close relations with our program, region, state, and tribal partners who can implement beneficial change. We're also tapping into social science expertise to engage communities. Revitalizing science communication and transparency. Here's my underlying philosophy. I think it's widely shared across the national academies. The scientific process has done us well for hundreds of years. Hypothesis, data testing, peer review, critique, publication. Add to this increasing data transparency through mandated open access to all federally sponsored manuscripts and the underlying data. The core here is open and transparent debate in the peer-reviewed literature and at conferences. Data serving as the currency of conversation. So let's be frank. Scientists can and should be pretty tough in critiquing each other's work. Society benefits from this process, independent of political interference. To paraphrase the past exchange at OSTP with Dr. Holdren, then President Obama's science advisor, following a rather tough critique by the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. OSTP staff, I know this because I was there. John, the PCAST meeting was really rough on our federal scientists today. John's response, I'm not sure what your problem is. That was no worse than a Harvard faculty meeting. Well, I just want to emphasize the benefits of that open exchange. So in closing, we also need to proactively tell more of the empowering science and discovery stories with the goal of raising awareness with the public of the many benefits that the federal science workforce provides to the nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I want to come back to this question about how to, in our conversation about how to, I think, show the public how scientists voice dissent. I mean, we have often very kind of internal communities, and I think this dissent and debate does not read the same to non-scientists as it does to scientists. And you know, there is some concern that some of the issues around mistrust of science are about this, and you know, this sort of cultural difference. So I'd love to come back to that. I want to remind our audience as we turn to Dr. Marie Bernard that we are gathering your questions in the Slido platform under the webcast, and we will get to them soon after a brief conversation between all of the panelists. So Marie, over to you.
Always have to unmute. Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson and Dr. Lubchenco. What I will be sharing will be very much to the third pillar that Dr. Lubchenco had mentioned, things that we are doing at NIH that will have a positive impact on our scientific workforce and really all of our workforce. We're very excited about it. It's called the NIH Unite Initiative. This is an initiative that came about as a result of our being very thoughtful about the events of 2020 that brought into sharp relief ongoing realities about racial injustice in our country and the responsibility of all of us to address the issue. We had a series of intense meetings of institute and center directors that helped to identify some initial issues. We had 2 self-assembled affinity groups, internal NIH staff to approach us, one being earlier career staff in a group that was called ACRE, 8 Concepts for Racial Equity, meetings with our senior African American and Black scientists, meetings with our internal anti-harassment steering committee for really candid discussions to inform next steps. And we arrived at a shared commitment to address structural racism. We felt that we could not allow the pivotal moment to pass. And certainly with the killings that occurred in Atlanta in March, that was further accentuated. The issues that we identified was that we needed to ensure that biomedical research and the administrative system that supports it is devoid of hostility grounded in race, sex, and other federally protected characteristics. So in this new initiative, we're committed to delineating elements that may perpetuate structural racism and biomedical research, both within NIH, our scientists, and all job classifications, and the extramural community, leading to a lack of personnel inclusiveness, equity, and diversity. We feel that all ideas must be given an equal and fair review, regardless of the dominant paradigm and who puts the idea forward. And as COVID-19 has made painfully clear, health disparities and inequities continue to contribute to morbidity and mortality in our nation, making it essential to redress the fundamental causes and to come up with effective interventions. So we're looking very broadly. As acknowledged by Francis Collins at that meeting, this is a problem. And he stated, and it can be found at our website if you Google NIH Unite or go to NIH.gov ending structural racism. He states, to those individuals in the biomedical research enterprise who've endured disadvantages due to structural racism, I am truly sorry. NIH is committed to instituting new ways to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and identifying and dismantling any policies and practices at our own agency that may harm our workforce and our science. So what was unveiled February 26th at a special meeting of the advisory committees, the NIH director, was this Unite initiative, 5 interacting work streams. 1, to understand stakeholder experiences through listening and learning. Another, to develop new research in health disparities, minority health, and health equity, both for our internal funded researchers and for external researchers. Another that's very pertinent to this discussion, improving the NIH culture and structure for equity, inclusion, and excellence. Because when you look at our scientific workforce, it does not reflect the diversity of the US population. We're holding ourselves to be transparent and to communicate and accountable for our internal staff as well as external stakeholders. And we have a group that's looking at the external research ecosystem. What sorts of changes are necessary in policy, culture, and structure to promote workforce diversity? We see this as being centrally placed and interacting with a number of other existing things, like the standing offices that are responsible, such as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office that deals with EEO issues, the Personnel Office, the Communications Office, the Ombudsman, the Scientific Workforce Diversity Office that I'm currently leading. We have 27 institutes and centers and the Office of the Director that also are doing things in this space. And it's very exciting to see all that has developed since February 26th, led by all. Yes, we are looking at that extramural ecosystem to see what needs to be done. But very importantly, we are looking internally at what sorts of things need to be changed to enhance and to further the issues for our own staff. This represents the 80 plus individuals who've been working since late October when the committees were charged to begin planning to get us started on what we know is going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. But our mile markers will be at the semi-annual meetings of the advisory committee to the director, where we will report out on what we have accomplished and what we envision over the course of the next many months. So I will be happy to and excited to share with you some of those other developments and answer questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Bernard. That's really exciting work, and we'll be really, I think, all interested to follow it. So I now want to invite everyone back to the virtual stage, all of the speakers, including my colleague, Dr. Lubchenco. I want to remind our audience that you can place your questions into the Slido platform and the webcast page at the bottom of the webcast. And I'm going to start with a question to each of you individually, but all of you should feel free to jump in and answer. And I'm going to start with Gretchen. So Gretchen, in your presentation, you offered a kind of array of agencies and scientists that have left the federal workforce in recent years. And I wanted to ask you to kind of drill down to what you, and I know your data doesn't reflect this, so some of this will take some speculation, but I think also, you know, you've been working on these issues for a very long time, so are certainly an expert in this space. But what, to your mind, are the top 2 or 3 reasons that scientists are departing? And I was thinking, you know, looking at your slide that both had people leaving educational sciences as well as places like EPA, but also gaining folks at NSF. So I'm trying to think through, if you had to sort of take a broad swath at things, like what do you think are the kind of principal reasons that you're hearing? And then related to that, thinking about your scientific integrity slide, what do you think in particular about scientific integrity policies when they're working help to sustain you know, a robust and healthy federal science workforce?
Sure. So to the first point, I think there's varied reasons that people leave, of course, but some of our data does suggest some indications. We know there's the more severe cases that Dr. Steyer mentioned of, you know, entire offices that were moved across the country. You know, that, of course, is going to be disruptive, and many people will choose not to make that move. I think additionally, what we saw, another question that was on that 2018 survey we asked was, whether you had noticed within your agency active efforts to get people to leave. So things like early buyouts and early retirements and hiring freezes and things that were sort of designed not to grow or maintain the staffing levels in the scientific workforce. And so I think there was some active efforts, and it seems like perhaps that was more of an issue at EPA, for example. And so I think there was some, active efforts to reduce the scientific workforce. And then finally, I would say that, I think we can imagine what it's like to work in an environment where you don't feel appreciated or respected, or that your job is worth doing. I actually had a scientist reach out to me who was at an agency and a few years ago, and they asked if I thought it would be worth staying, like if their career was worth doing if they stayed there. And it just broke my heart to think that people, were thinking about that it might not even be worth staying. And so that is a good pivot to your second question, and in that creating an environment where people feel like their scientific work is appreciated and is contributing to the broader mission of the agency is a really great way to recruit and retain a strong scientific workforce, because many in the scientific community, we just want our work to matter, right? We just want to be able to do good things. And I think there's many ways that the federal service is very appealing for a scientist. I interned actually at EPA and in that beautiful Research Triangle Park campus that Dr. Steyer showed briefly. And it's a really great environment to be able to do scientific work, to have it be policy relevant and so adjacent to things that really matter at the national level. And so I think that we can help recruit and retain people if we have leadership that is clear that they have your back, that you can be a scientist, you can be free to do your work and to communicate that work without fear and without feeling like you need to navigate political sensitivities or feeling like your work's going to be suppressed. And so I think we've already seen a lot of strides from to come back from that and build up the trust among the federal workforce. And I think we can continue on that path to really create an environment where science can thrive at agencies.
Thank you, Dr. Goldman. Others want to weigh in on push and pull factors in recent years out of the federal science workforce and the sort of intersection with scientific integrity? Bruce, please.
I'm naturally very bad with quiet moments, and Gretchen said such nice things about our facility in North Carolina that I really had to say something good about that too. I have a lens of research and development. That's my primary office. So, I mean, as I pointed out in my comments, we have an older population. I believe there's a lot of very successful, productive scientists who've been a while. They're frankly looking toward that, as I pointed out in my comments, that steadiness of the budget to be able to bring in postdocs and to bring in someone to sort of inherit the legacy that they've created and then bring them along in the field. So it's a bit different, I believe, to the program offices. And so I want to just be careful at EPA. I'm from the research side. There's the program office side of EPA with lots of scientists as well. And I'm speculating a bit here, but it must be fairly hard to write rules. They came to EPA to protect human health and the environment, and it must be fairly hard to write rules that don't necessarily go in that same direction. So there may be some angst there, but again, I'm speculating a bit there, but certainly from OID, we're looking to bring in young people. We need some steadiness of the budget to do that. We also like some of those different hiring mechanisms. We need some permanence there as well with some of those alternative hiring mechanisms.
Thanks very much, Bruce. You raised now just some of the issues that Max raised in his presentation. So Max, I wanted to come to you with a question about what in particular, you offered a lot of great recommendations. I was really struck by your idea of needing to improve the federal brand. on the one hand, of course, yes, that's true. On the other hand, engaging in a kind of critical conversation about federal government, runs the risk of kind of eroding the brand further. So I feel like we're kind of stuck in a little bit of a kind of quagmire with regard to wanting to make improvements that require us to be critical. But that said, I wanted to know what you thought were distinctive to science and federal science about the issues that you raised. I mean, what's so incredible about the work of your organization is that for decades you've been helping us to think about the larger kind of ecosystem of of federal work. What in particular would you identify of either the issues or the solutions that are distinctive, would you think, particularly to the science and technology enterprise?
So this is first of all, I can't help but just say thank you to Dr. Goldman. I'm the only non-doctor here, so, and I don't hold that with any pride, but just so that you can just call me Max, and that would be great. And look, I think your questions are a really strong one. Obviously, if I could just back up, I didn't want to jump in on the first question because I knew you were going to ask me something. I think one thing that's missing here right now, and this is related to your question too, is that we can look at attrition data and see, where there are particularly bad places, but what we don't have across the entire government is actually a human capital plan around science. And we don't really know what we need in our government. So you can see where are people leaving, and you obviously don't want to see people leaving for the wrong reasons, but we are not fundamentally putting our arms around the problem if we haven't actually determined what do we need. And what talent do we need against the vision of what we want to achieve? And I think what is distinctive about the science and tech community is that, one, it is an important horizontal across the entire government. The tendency in government is to be thinking very vertically, and OSTP is one of the few organizations that has that enterprise perspective. But bluntly, they're tiny against the size of the full massive government. And we in today's world, in my view, our problems don't respect the institutional boundaries that were created historically. They require collaboration across organizations within the executive branch, with Congress, intergovernmentally, and cross-sector. And that's not happening. And it's especially important in the science and tech arena because science and tech are so fundamental to the solution set of the problems that we face today. And it is stunning to see, in essence, we have a legacy government not keeping up with the world around it. And what's changing most rapidly is our scientific and technological understanding. So for me, that would be the core of what we really need to see done here. And ultimately, this is a leadership issue. For any large organization, the leaders are most fundamental. And we don't have leadership inside government or outside government that is aligned to the ultimate capability of those organizations. Now, come back around to your really important point that you made about the brand question. And I just want to say to begin with that this is a multi-part problem, and why I try to define the problem is I think that fundamentally is crucial in thinking about what the solution set is. If you just took on the brand and brand alone, we'd be in trouble because you could push talent into the government and it wouldn't be pushing on the proverbial string. But I respectfully just take a different perspective on I don't see attention here. I think if we don't confront directly the criticisms, we'll never ultimately be able to get at the critical issues that need to change and the public's understanding of their government in a real way. I think what we have right now is a government that is, one, not well led, and two, which is surrounded internally and externally by capability to find problem and not solution. We have almost no bright spot analysis in our government. As a core, methodological approach, for improvement. And I don't believe any organization gets better if all you do is kick it. And there are amazing things that are happening and no one knows about them inside or outside of government. And obviously I'm stating this in an even more provocative way. There are exceptions. Almost everything that needs to happen is happening in some place, typically not in very many. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I look forward to future conversation.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful. And I think, it's the important conversation that we need to have, that there's a kind of multifaceted strategy, multifaceted problems, and that that critique is okay. So I wanted to turn, Bruce, next to you to ask about retention in junior scientists. I was really struck, and this is a little bit related to Max's response and provocation, by your comments about the lack of retention of talent. We're sitting here with Marie Bernard, who I imagine Dr. Bernard's portfolio, among other things, includes great science and, and strategy on how to retain scientists. The NSF has a whole directorate that spends a lot of time and energy on how to keep people in the STEM pipeline, in the talent pipeline. And yet within government itself, to take your observation, we have a challenge with retention. So what suggestions would you offer for us to, I think, leverage many of the existing programs and strategies that a lot of the federal government funds, but that we're clearly not bringing into the work that, the work of federal science retention?
So, Alondra, I guess I'm hoping I didn't say that. I was more along, yes, I understand retention's a wonderful thing, but I guess part of my point up front with regard to research and development is that we have a lot of scientists that have been with us for a long time and had very long successful careers. We're looking for the stability at the front end to bring them in, to bring in the postdocs and the ORISE fellows, and then to create a steady pathway. More of the graphic that I showed, those, the budget cut threats of 42% that are then restored by Congress, and up and down the jagged 4 years of that kind of signaling, makes it. And the response to that, we need to make sure that we can actually, keep the lights on in the facility. So it makes it hard to have a steady pathway where each year we have 30 new postdocs coming in and we can assign them out as we go forward. It's like some years, I think we pulled in close to 100. When we get the hiring capacity, we bring in the postdocs, but then they count against our FTE ceiling. So steadiness and predictability of the budget is really helpful then to allow us to plan long term to bring in these people. That doesn't get to the retention, because again, from OID's perspective, I think once we bring the scientists in, we have good retention. In fact, that's part of we have a lot of the longer retention workforce looking toward retirement eligibility. And the idea is, how do we actually, backfill to make sure we don't lose all that institutional memory?
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, the clarification. But I think we do have still given, I think, Gretchen's data, the sort of bigger concern about why folks are leaving and how we might turn some of the insights that we fund and the research that we fund about pipeline retention back on ourselves, including issues around budget stability. So thanks very much, Bruce. Dr. Bernard, I wanted to turn to you. I've been struck, I'm such an admirer of the work that you've been doing with the Unite program, and I was struck that it, taken together, very much looks like what the Biden-Harris administration would call a kind of whole of government approach. So it is an approach that includes internal workforce, extramural funding, organizational culture. So I really wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how some of the thinking of you and your colleagues with regards to what I think is effectively an ecosystem approach to transformation at NIH and to participation, diversity, and inclusion in the federal workforce, federal science workforce, excuse me.
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. Yes, it's an exciting and daunting task that we've taken on, because we have said that we want to look at every aspect of how things work at NIH to make sure that we identify what barriers may exist for people entering and being retained, and to do something about those things. We, like EPA, do have a lot of long-serving scientists, but we do see a problem earlier in the pathway of getting people into our tenure track program and through to being tenured scientists and staying within NIH for a long period of time on the intramural side. Among our extramural staff, the program staff who are responsible for developing initiatives, there is potentially even more work to be done. And on both ends of that, we are stepping back and saying, okay, what are the recruitment policies? Someone talked about the issue of job classification. And for our intramural scientists, we can get them a Title 42 somewhat more easily than you can. Absolutely, it's very difficult on the extramural side. And so recruiting and retaining people on the extramural side in keeping with their scientific experience and credentials can be a challenge. Getting people, again, who are relatively earlier in their career committed to staying in the long term when there are other options in the private sector, at academic institutions, at research institutions, can be a challenge because of the limitations in what one can do within government and the speed with which one can do those things within government. We have developed some programs that have proven to be very effective. In particular, in our intramural program, we have programs where we recruit people in cohorts as opposed to individual one-offs for various positions. And that's proving to be effective in bringing in a number of excellent scientists. And we've added to that some additional support and mentoring for those individuals. It's relatively new. We're evaluating to see what the impact is there. But there are opportunities at every step of the way: the recruitment, the retention, the advancement, awards, to make improvements. And that's what we are looking at very critically, so that we can have the ideal scientific workforce that's in our mind.
Thank you for that. And I think a nice counterpoint to Bruce's observation that you want, longstanding folks, and also to bring in a kind of new generation and a diverse generation of colleagues to the table. So let's go now to a few questions from the audience, and I will turn to Jane first and Gretchen to answer this one, but others should jump in as well. In rebuilding the federal scientific workforce, are there any important differences across the biomedical and environmental science workforce to consider? And we might expand that to, the various different types of science that are done in the federal government. Are the issues and solutions across these domains the same or different?
That is a really good, Jane, did you want to?
Go ahead, Gretchen.
It's a very good question, because we have found that scientists really vary in what they're interested in, what is important to them in a federal workforce context. As an example, one thing that has come up in past surveys is that CDC scientists, for example, like to publish, and that it is important to them to be able to continue publishing in the scientific literature, and they want policies and processes and around clearance that allow for that to happen. But that didn't come up in the same way at other agencies of what people want. And so I think there are differences between agencies to consider when thinking about, what do people feel like they need, what would help them thrive. And I also just want to underscore what Dr. Bernard is working on so well at NIH is the idea that, we know what sort of has worked in the past to recruit many who have been in the workforce for a long time. But if we want to diversify who is able to be in that environment and who can thrive in the federal workforce and stay, we should also be rethinking what others need, right? Because a lot of historically, what might have worked for the workforce, in the less diverse workforce that we've had, might not be the same as what would be useful now to ensure we can benefit from including everyone in the federal scientific workforce. And so I think programs like that can also go a long way.
Thank you. Jane?
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting question. And I think there is huge diversity across not only agencies, but scientific disciplines with respect to how politics intersects with science, and the extent to which scientific information has unfortunately been made to be political. And that has been particularly true in climate science, for example. But also in some types of biomedical research around stem cells, for example. And so I think it's just important to recognize that there is a diversity of of issues. There's a diversity of cultures. There is a diversity within and among agencies. And we have to embrace all of that diversity and create the conditions that allow for scientists across those disciplines to be able to do their work and to thrive.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to weigh on this question? We have a couple of more queued up, if not.
So I actually I would like to follow up on a question from Gretchen. Gretchen, you've been very engaged with 500 women scientists. I think you have a good pulse on the younger, diverse community of scientists that we would like to attract into government. Can you share with us what you think, do they see, and if not, what would it take for them to see being a federal scientist, something that would be attractive and rewarding and something that they would jump at a chance to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm on the board of 500 Women Scientists, which is a grassroots nonprofit that looks at diversity and inclusion and access to science for everyone. I think one thing that could be showcased in the government is, some of the things that many on the inside of the federal scientific workforce know very well, which is, that it's very flexible, that it is a chance to influence or be closer to policy decisions and have your work be really meaningful. Because that's one thing that we're seeing for younger scientists is that, they really want that impact to be able to say that what they're doing is valued, is being used, is benefiting the world in some way. And I think, that's a really big advantage that federal service offers, because you are, serving the nation and have missions that really are meaningful for a scientist who's starting their career to contribute to. So I think highlighting that element can be a huge factor. And, the other sort of broad one I would say that is what Dr. Bernard is working on is that that culture really matters. And it is very important for people to want to be in a culture that they feel is a good fit, that is inclusive of everyone, that allows them to thrive. And so I think tackling some of these, these bigger questions and challenges around structural racism and how do we make sure that we can create better environments for people to be able to do their work, where I think we're seeing with younger generations that is more important for what they want out of a workplace than perhaps had been apparent in previous years.
Thank you for that, Gretchen. So we've got a question about, this is to Max in particular, but I think can be answered by many of you. How can the very concerning defects you outlined in the hiring process for federal scientists be remedied, given the bureaucratic impediments and long-term time frame needed? So this has come up in a few of your comments. If Max or others want to weigh in on that.
Sure, and there are, again, a lot of different aspects to what's broken in the hiring process. And I think it begins once more, and I will keep hitting this note, as a leadership issue that by and large, the hiring managers or leadership in agency often devolves the hiring to a set of HR folk rather than seeing that as their primary responsibility. And there are a bunch of things that can be done within the existing rule set, and then there are some rules themselves that need to change. So an example in the category of what can be done today without rule change is including subject matter experts in the front end review of resumes. So I mentioned earlier that 90% of job hires are done on the basis of the applicant simply saying they have the appropriate skill set. And it's the HR professional without the technical expertise that is almost inevitably in charge of deciding whether that's true or not, which obviously makes no sense. You don't need any rule change. You can actually, within the existing rules, simply have your subject matter experts do the resume reviews and it's not happening. And again, I think it's this disconnect between ownership and a process. There are other things that actually do require rule change, and some of them that we've already made. So again, I pointed out that we should be looking at the government as a larger enterprise, and we were able to encourage the passage of a legislation that allows agencies to share their hiring, to share the certifications. No agencies are doing it. So we actually created a mechanism that enables you, if you found, at EPA 20 amazing, pick your wonderful science, and you only hire 10 of them, you actually, historically, no other agency could hire those other 10 that were not hired, that have to go back and do their own hiring process. Today, you can actually share that talent, but agencies are simply not doing it. Can't resist, finally, every professional organization in the private sector uses student interns as their primary entry pipeline in. And some places like NASA do a good job with that. But by and large, that's not happening nearly enough either. So that'd be another place where you could actually make a big difference. But people have to care. We need good data on what's actually happening. And we need to focus on, really the primary issues. The time to hire is very important, but quality of hire even more.
Thank you very much for that, Max. And certainly, I will say within OSTP, it seems clear to us that all of the kind of major issues that we face, be those kind of scientific problems, technical problems, or issues, really cross all of our divisions. And so, we are constantly sort of saying, well, yes, semiconductors, is an issue for national security, but it obviously is an issue for climate and environment, has everything to do with the STEM education pipeline and the like. And so certainly in our little bit mighty shop, we are really trying to think about this kind of enterprise approach as you're suggesting, and would be worth some further conversation about this sort of human capital strategy plan as well. So thank you very much for that. So we are almost at time. I'm going to make a few remarks to wrap us up. If anyone has any final remarks they'd like to make, I want to leave you an opening for a few parting comments. Otherwise, we will begin to wrap up our conversation.
Well, one thing I might add quickly, Dr. Nelson, if you have time, is just to note that we do also, in thinking about diversifying the workforce, want to think about ensuring that the managers and overseers of that work are also trained to do better and have the ability to manage a more diverse team. So I think as we think about retention and recruitment of new people, we need to also be thinking about ways that we can ensure that's a better place for them to thrive internally as well.
Critical insight. Thank you for that.
And Alondra, I'd just like to clarify, actually for the National Academy's audience too, and maybe explain the differences that were raised in your question about retention and the differences between the different types of scientists, between different organizations and also within EPA. I know I speak primarily for the researchers in ORD, where they publication, just as Gretchen said regarding CDC, publication is really important to them, but they also have to be very responsive to the applied needs of the programs, regions, states, and tribes that EPA works with. I just want to make a big shout out for all the scientists that do regulatory type science, whether it's at EPA's regulatory program offices or at FDA and other places, where, they actually write the regulation that benefits society. And so that's what those scientists are doing, but it has some limitations on it. Like when you're writing a regulation on things that really matter, let's say the Clean Power Plan, and things like that, there's litigation. There's always litigation with a regulation. And so it's really important. So sometimes their ability to publish in the peer-reviewed literature or to make comments in the press are limited by the fact that what they're doing is really important. And there will be litigation. And what's that? The Miranda principle. Everything you say can and will be used against you. So it's just really a shout out to the scientists in the programs across the federal government doing that necessary work. But again, just to highlight between researchers who really ought to be publishing in literature and talking freely, and those scientists that have to work close to that nexus with regulation.
Thank you for that. Marie, Dr. Broad, you're going to jump in?
Yes, I just wanted to thank those of you in the audience who responded to the request for information that NIH had put out related to the Unite Initiative that closed on Friday. We had more than 900 individuals, institutions, organizations who responded. So thank you so much. And please be on the lookout. We will be doing listening sessions over the course of the next many months to further inform our thoughts as we move forward, because the sort of cultural change that we're looking to make, we think is going to benefit all of our workforce, whether they are individuals who have been subject to structural racism or not. It's going to be something that will make for a better production of science, more creativity, inclusion, et cetera. So thank you, and look forward to hearing from people in the listening sessions.
Marie, that's an extraordinary response, and it really speaks to the necessity of the work you're doing at Nih Unite. Great to hear that. Max, any final words from you?
Yes, first, obviously, thank you. And one last comment, and that would be that my sense is that in government, the easiest things to change are things that are already done. And and when I say that, I think the biggest opportunity we have to improve what we have right now is to harvest the innovation that's taken place as a result of the pandemic. Our government has fundamentally shifted its operating model by necessity. And I think we really need to examine what elements of that change ought to be our future state as well. And I think that if we do that, we can create a much more attractive work environment, especially for new talent, and frankly, a lot more collaboration, because I think that's one of the things that has occurred in very interesting ways. So I think really intentionally examining what has taken place and using that in a way to create a plan forward, which is taking place in pockets. The Office of Personnel Management, GSA, are doing it, but frankly, I think it'd be a great exercise for the science community to do as well.
Thanks so much for those great insights. My fearless colleague, Jane, any final comments from you?
This has been so rich, and yet I feel that we have only just initiated this conversation. There is so much that we can do. I'm very grateful to each of you for joining us and for sharing your thoughts. Let's continue this conversation. This is such an important issue for the nation. We need to seize the opportunity and make some good things happen here.
Thank you so much, Jane. And I join Jane and wanting to, endorse that we hope to continue this conversation with each of you, and also as a larger community of scientists working in the federal government and people who care about science more generally. So I just wanted to say, a few remarks. I mean, this is to wrap up, but this has been a truly incredible discussion of really how to apply a value of building back better to the federal science workforce. And it's clear from the conversation that supporting and restoring scientific integrity will be one of the important tools that we will use as we rebuild this workforce. As Dr. Lubchenco mentioned in her opening remarks, President Biden has asked OSTP to help coordinate a response to his memorandum on restoring trust in government through scientific integrity and evidence-based policymaking. And this memorandum instructs us to to offer insights about how to, intervene and improper political interference, and also to intervene in the suppression or distortion of scientific and technological findings. And we are really pleased to be bringing to the table colleagues from, many agencies, many different types of agencies, to Bruce's point, from regulatory science agencies, from agencies that do basic science, including agencies that also fund science. So we are really engaging colleagues broadly in this enterprise. But I think differently from prior pursuits, this issue of really wanting to have a process that's deliberative and that's inclusive, I think will mark this scientific integrity conversation as being distinct. that we've really sort of prized the participation and contribution of scientists from across government who bring their diverse perspectives to the endeavor, including, as I said, type and size of agency, type of discipline, stage of career, methodology, and people's personal and professional backgrounds, including explicitly and intentionally scientists and researchers from different gender, race, ethnicity, and other backgrounds, understanding that all of this is really key for the equitable delivery of federal government programs and of federal science. So we're taking, as the president has asked us to do, a quite expansive view of what it means to sort of operationalize scientific integrity and by extension, what it means to restore the the federal science workforce. I hope that we can work together to bring the energy and ideas of this conversation to give shape to the science and technology research community in the present, but also to its future by investing, and again, to use a term that President Biden uses in the American Jobs Plan, social infrastructure. To build back better means to not accept, I think, incorrect zero-sum calculations about the science and technology enterprise, that we need to have a more expansive and capacious understanding of what that means, that we can increase science immigration and also deepen and expand participation and opportunity for scientists here in the United States, including offering opportunities from underserved communities and offering opportunities to a new generation of scientists who have not been included in the federal science and technology enterprise in the past. Not thinking about the science enterprise as a zero-sum game also means having a kind of vision for STEM education, for STEM outreach, for STEM engagement that inspires a workforce of the future. It means taking seriously creating research settings and workplaces in which all can thrive, which is a mission of the Unite program. It also means taking seriously our responsibilities to the American public and playing our part to ensure and build trust by being mindful of the fact that federal science is part of and central to the democratic process. And doing this will require taking a lead from EPA, from NOAA, and from other agencies that understand that the science that they do has social dimensions. And these two agencies and others increasingly include social science in its work. The challenges identified by the federal science workforce conversation that we've had today, I think also really underscore the need to invest in social infrastructure. And to think really, and I think honest and forthright ways about who is included on committees, who can share their vision in the workplace, who can speak up, who receives funding, who cares for children, what topics are funded and awarded, and the like. On the face of it, none of these issues that I've just raised seem to be about science with a capital S. But of course, rebuilding the federal science workforce and indeed building back better and science and technology and beyond will require that we address all of these issues while increasing funding for research and development and while expanding opportunity for STEM engagement. It will require a rebuilding of the federal science workforce that develops rigorous, innovative science and technology that's made possible through a dynamic diversity of creativity and ideas, and that can contribute to a more equitable global society. So I thank you again for beginning this conversation and very much look forward to continuing it in the weeks and months to come. Thank you.